So here is just a small section between I-84, which is the highway over there. There we go. That U-Haul is running on. And I'll be pointing out a few things like the straight line over here. You notice how it burns to a straight line. Just about everywhere there's an edge, it's a pretty well-defined edge. It's not jagged, and it's not a phased transition between burn and unburn. There is a clear line. Even though it's not perfectly straight, it curves a little bit. It is a well-defined line because it's like a bolt of electricity works its way across the land. Hopefully I'll find an example to show you, but when I investigated my first plasma fire in Spanish Fork, what I realized is that the electricity flows like water across the land, and anywhere there's a high spot, it doesn't burn on the mound. Like when you flood a field with water, anywhere that there's a dirt mound will not be wet, not be saturated dirt. And that is how it works with these, and that's why you'll find some pieces of wood that are just on the ground, not actually plugged into the ground with roots, have this weird burn pattern where it burns on each end, because it is electrified by virtue of the flooding effect, where that electricity flows across the ground like water, and high spots do not get burned. Remember that. It may come into play in the near future. So the thing I'm going to show you right here is that all of these, as usual, you can see that it's more burnt in the middle. And anywhere that these are remaining, they're snapped off at the bottom. Try and actually reverse the flow here so we can use the sun to our advantage. They're burnt more in the middle at the bottom, and they snap off like a fuse that had too much electricity flowing through it. All of them, you can see this one's a good example. If we can get the focus to, there we go. You can kind of see how that one's more burnt at the bottom and on the inside, yet it has all this good fuel that could have burned and didn't. And that's the case with each and every one of these. Burnt at the bottom and snapped off, falling over, every single one. So I won't keep going over more and more and more, but I just want to show you that each and every one of these has the same pattern. Burnt off, snapped off because it snapped like a fuse when it had too much electricity running through it. All of them. Plenty of fuel right there. Same burn pattern. A lot of places they disappeared. You'll see these little ash piles where it burned much hotter in these little spots. That's another one of the telltale signs, is when you see these spots that are burning harder than everything around them, it's because more electricity was flowing through right there. You can see this one actually sizzled all those right down to nothing and turned them to ash rather than snapping them and tipping them over. And in some cases, for whatever reason, this one's left standing. Missing half of its foliage, but otherwise none the worse for wear. But the one thing that's certain is that we keep seeing this over and over and over. Snapped off, burnt in the middle. And so it goes throughout this whole area. I just came across this as you see it. I'm not going to try to explain that. I'm going to just say the farmer who left these tracks in the dirt with his tractor picked this piece up and threw it right there, because otherwise, how do you explain that? This is one of those pieces that was tipped over and snapped, thrown up into a tree, up into a small bush. Like, how do you explain that? I'm just going to leave that one, because until I see a pattern of that happening more often, I'm just going to write that off as some sort of anomaly, probably caused by a person who came along and picked it up and then threw it in the bush. Or it got caught on the wheels of the tractor and got thrown up into the bush. One thing I will mention that I'm noticing more and more often, you notice here the burn line stops at the road, right? Over here, it stops very near the road, here, and up here, but it's not actually the road that works as a fire break right there. It stopped. The straight line burn line pretty much runs a course with the road, but it's not exactly on the road. There's still foliage left right there to be burned from here to here, that it could actually burned all the way over to the road, and it didn't. It looks to me like pieces of land. You can see this all over, where so you can tell the property divide line, because the guy takes care of this grass and it's all one crop, and then the next land over, small dirt road, or whatever the dividing line is, some sprinklers or whatever, and the burn line follows the property line. And it can be laid out to hit one house and dodge another, and hit this house and dodge that house. Basically putting a stencil on the end of the laser and having it follow this dirt road with a pretty good approximation, but it's obviously not the dirt road that stopped the burn. You can see up here, the dirt road is quite a ways from the burn line, and all the way down the dirt road is actually not the stop of the burn line. It just happens to be real close. Like many of these other burn lines, you'll notice the same exact thing. Here's just a few more examples. Burnt on the bottom there, where it snapped off, and it's laying on blackened ground with this unburnt foliage, which is another way that I know a lot of this is flameless forest fire. Because this black stuff on the ground, if it produced any flame, it would have lit these up, but it didn't. And all of these are just laying here with the same exact burn pattern. Burnt at the bottom. On the bottom, on the inside, I'm trying to get that one. There we go. And on and on and on it goes. And you see all this stuff literally just tipped over. Not stuck into the ground anymore, but not burned either. All these that you see out here, the ones that are laying on the ground, same thing, tipped over, burnt at the bottom, snapped like a fuse. Same thing with all these. These are the ones that we just played with. Same thing with this one. And that one. And that one. And that one. And all these. And on and on it goes. Okay, I'm gonna have to go check this out because it looks like the burn line actually stops just before the train tracks. Like they intentionally put a protective barrier up at the train tracks, and that's how these frequencies work. There's the carrier wave and the destroyer frequency, and the carrier wave can also be loaded up with a barrier or a hedge of protection. As you can see, the burn line stops at the train tracks, and most people would say, oh, the train must have thrown a spark and that's what caused the fire on both sides of the track. Nope. There's an unburned streak going right there along with the train track. Let's go check it. Here's a little closer. You can see it's a very straight line where the burn stops. This is reminiscent of after the Paradise fires, there was a baseball field with a straight line. Burned on one side, unburned on the other side, perfectly straight line. I've come across quite a few of these straight lines. And if you notice, all the fuel that stops right here at the burn line, where the burn line stops, there's plenty of fuel that says that should have burned, at least that little bit. Maybe not over here, but that little bit right there should have burned. Because it's so low to the ground and it's so brittle and dry, just a little bit of flame would have taken this out. But this is right along the burn line. Going both directions. Foliage right on the burn line. What does that tell you? Fires don't stop right on a line of good foliage that they could burn. It's an electrical discharge. Let's go check out on the other side of the train tracks. We're still on the same side of the train tracks. I want to catch this burn line. Over there it's a little more sporadic. But what I will tell you is you'll notice right beneath the trees, there's just like the root ball goes down in approximately the same shape as the branches, the root ball goes down, and you'll notice a perimeter around the edge of these trees and bushes where it's spotty burning, where the burn patch along the bottom matches the branch pattern above, because that's the root pattern below conducting all of the electricity. I just want to go along and get a real good shot along this whole line where you can see the burn line is very precise, right there. Right where the remaining foliage that it could have and should have and would have burned if it was fire remains along this whole line. More foliage. The whole burn line goes right up to this point of perfectly fine fuel. Especially when we get up to this point here. You can see how that's a straight line. And right along the straight line where it stops burning is all this perfectly fine fuel. Okay, now let's go check the other side. On this side, the burning starts sporadically, not as straight of a line, but you'll notice there is a barrier where there's unburned foliage on the train track side of the stencil line that was drawn right here and right there in order to stop the burn, have it hop the tracks and start again over here. So that tells you there's no way this was a fire that started at the train tracks, because there's an unburned barrier on each side of the train tracks, as if they were protected. These are examples of how these bushes, like the one that I showed you at my house, burns hard at the center, right here, and leaves the unburned around it. Fire doesn't start from the center of a bush unless you're like, talking to God. That was my biblical joke. Probably didn't get too many laughs, but that's okay. You notice how each one of these has highly burnt center weeds and a few that are still standing. And the few that are still standing are at the outer edge. And the ones that are highly burnt are in the middle. On all of these. Here's the middle. The ones that are on the outer edge still unburnt. The ones that are unburnt are on the outer edge. Notice that with these other couples. Highly burnt in the middle, a few on the outer edge. Outer edge, burnt in the middle. Outer edge, ash in the middle. and on the train track side, no less. So how does these turn to ash like that? And these are left untouched? Fire don't do that. Okay. And just to be clear, that hedge of protection, a couple feet down there of unburnt before the actual burned area starts, on both sides of the train track, goes all the way. On that side, there's your unburned hedge of protection for the train track. And on this side, all these bushes that happen to not get burned. And then everything that way is burned. Everything out that way looked just like this right here. But the line was designed, intelligent design to these fires. And as we get further down here, you'll notice there's still a small hedge of unburnt foliage between the train track and the highly burned area. On both sides of the track. Got to keep the trains running on time. Don't want this fire interfering with some freight delivery. So here's a good example of the stalk that it was growing from. The ash right here on the end, and you can tell they flopped out. Here's another one. What I saw in my first fire inspection was that where the base of the plant was, there was limbs laying out in a circular direction all around where the stalk once held them together. And every one of these is exactly that. And they were all connected right here. Like fuses that disconnect from the energy source because they got overloaded with energy. Oops. You can see how here was the base for these, for this one, and this one were all connected to there. These were connected to right here. And you can find these little spots all over here where you can see where the center was and then the branches that are lying around where they once were. Here you can see the skeleton of what was once a branch that burned to ash. In my first plasma fire, these skeletons on the ground that represent where a branch once was were red. Like the only thing left was the metal, like iron. A red dust on the ground that formed the shape of trees and limbs that were turned to not even ash. They were turned to a fine red dust. Like the metal, the iron in them was the only thing remaining. And it looks like there was a track hoe out here since the fire. That's what these tracks are about. That's what some of these marks in the dirt are about. And it was probably one of those, oh, we got a dust devil kicking up. It's probably one of those train tractor things. Here's an example of what I was talking about. Notice how the ground is scorched in a pattern around the bottom of these bushes, approximately the same as the branches above the bush. Here's another example. On the outer edge, on the train track side, we have foliage remaining here. Lots and lots of fire. Here, untouched around the outer edge. So now I'm hot on the trail of this tractor that came through after the fire, but what I'm going to point out here, the road did not create the fire break. There is a barrier of foliage that would have burned that was perfectly fine fuel, and the fire stopped over here. And up there, we're going to go check out that burn line. And it approximately follows the road, but you can tell the road is not what stopped it. And in fact, you can see like a 90-degree angle on the burn line here. So that'll be pretty cool. And so what some people may be thinking, and it's great because I do love logic and reason, is that this was a controlled burn and the farmer ran his tractor right here and sprayed down the weeds along the edge and over there by the railroad in order that he could do a controlled burn on his field. But the problem with that is this isn't farm field that you do a controlled burn on. This is wild land. And all the other evidence, like all those branches that are broke off that show there was electricity involved here, kind of defies the idea that this could have been a controlled burn, and the farmer is the reason that there is a hedge of unburned fuel between the road and the fire burn line and on both sides of the train track. Unless the farmers somehow are working in conjunction with the plasma, which is possible, I suppose. But we got to stay somewhat within some sort of bounds of logic and reason and let some sort of thread of understanding run through our concept of what we're seeing here. That's just another example, burned at the bottom, snapped off. So I think it's very, very unlikely that this was a controlled burn, and that's why we see these hedges of unburned fuel. More likely, the actual electricity itself can be controlled, turned on and off, and directed. And they map it out with GPS and tell it to stop right along this road and right along those train tracks, and then start again on the other side of the train tracks and work its way over to the road. Or it's a sentient plasma. Smart fires. That's basically the premise of this guy does a YouTube by the name of J Dreamers. That plasma is personified in all of these ancient texts, like maybe all of the arms of Shiva the Destroyer. Those are actually plasma filaments. And that the plasma is sentient, and it tends to always go get the bad guys and leave the good guys alone. And I sure hope that's the case. Great gravy, Batman. It's like they were dialing it in to see how well they could control the burn in some random area in the middle of nowhere, just plotting points between two random dirt roads and a train track and seeing how well they could do with the hedge of protection on the train track and making sure it stops at the road line. And this is what I've said before, you can be given a hedge of protection, a plasma dome that surrounds you. And that's why it's so easy as the push of a button. But first we gotta let everyone show their true colors and take their position wherever they're gonna stand on the issues. And each person has a personalized radio frequency. They can be given a personal hedge of protection while everyone else is vaporized. That's how this works.